Hello there and welcome back to Valdis Story. Today we're on a quest for hearts. I told you we'd be building that harem soon enough. But on the way here to start this quest, I gotta level up, so let's just allocate that stat point. Agility is always good for Reina. And the skill point. This is a bit more difficult decision to make, not because we have too many choices, but because we have too little. We've already picked up the entirety of the monk tree and most of the stuff from the golden one tree that we're interested in. Ultimately I go with fate. Increase spell ruin with luck, since we now have a fair amount of passive luck. Every little bit helps. So, this is the first heart we're looking for. That of this spider maiden lass. Unfortunately, we kind of end up killing her. Reina is just... she's too used to using violence to get her way at this point. So we'll have to make do and instead pick up this heart that's down here. This is one of the treasure chests that I always end up forgetting about. It looks like you'll drop straight into the room below, but there's actually a little bit of platforming you can do. So, for our next selection of hearts, we'll be going after the hearts of some young, strapping guardsmen. Of course, in order to do so, we'll have to look rather handsome ourselves, and for that we visit Leroy. Oh, and also we're going to be picking up this pretty flower, not as a gift for our prospective harem mates, but to honor someone sadly departed. If you're wondering where I picked up that ancient coin, that was a lucky drop from an enemy. As it turns out, that bit of common knowledge that luck not from level ups doesn't affect the drop rate of ancient coins is false. Ah, a wonderful red berry hat. That is exactly what we're looking for. Now we're ready for a night on the town and to woo the hearts of many young men. The first of which is right here in Tagram. That first Kickstarter named NPC that we came across, Jamie Starr. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and so we win it easily. The next is a young guardsman in Ishq, the one guarding the exit to the temple. He too is quite attracted to us thanks to our hat. Who knew that was the secret to winning affection like this? The third and final is Joey Coco in the prison. He's actually not a fan of our hat, but it seems reverse psychology is effective in the battlegrounds of love as well. Although he is the final guardsman that we're wooing, it is not the final heart we're collecting. That is for honoring Paish. May he rest in peace. So yeah, that's a cool little side quest that I believe they added with the patch that introduced Vladin and Gilda. I normally don't bother with it because you really don't need all this extra HP, but we really want that thanks to our fighter's bandages, as the damage it adds to our fists is based on our max HP. We now have 157 attack, whereas before we only had 135, so it's a pretty significant boost. Now, having completed our harem and having honored the dead, let's head on over to the library to collect something I forgot about. And on the way, we pick up our final level up. We haven't even fought any of these super bosses yet, and yet we're already maxed. I told you it was easy to hit the level cap here. I decided to go with the spellcasting speed boost because it does make a pretty significant difference, and we're now using magic a fair bit. These lightning grapple spells are so gosh darn useful against so many enemy types. Would you believe that I didn't actually use this spell much prior to watching an LP of this game? When I mentioned before, I believe, a Wyatt playthrough by DW. I just never thought to use it, and I had so much more trouble in my previous playthroughs as a result. Anyway, the thing I forgot here is the final focus finisher that's available. This one is available to pick up once all other crew members are back at the library, or the main ones at least. We're not going to bother with it because it has way too high of a focus cost. For an agility build that practically lives in focus mode, that's really not ideal. I'll show it off when we play as Vladin. So, next on our journey, before we fight any of the super bosses, we want to pick up the Teachings of the Lifeblade, the skill that Moira used to rend an eye from Alagath and Morgato. As its description states, it gives us a significant bonus damage to gods and demigods while we're in focus mode. That's gonna be relevant in like 20 seconds. Before then though, we're gonna have to do another timing puzzle. There are a few of these in these final areas here. Make sure you're ready to fight a tough opponent though before you do it, because you won't have much time to get into the next room and the boss is right there. That's why I'm reconfiguring my spell loadout here, trying to figure out what would work best against the upcoming boss. As it will turn out, that level of caution wasn't really necessary. I've had trouble with this in the other super bosses that we'll be fighting today in the past, but maybe I just know a lot more about Reina than I did back then, or just the game in general, I guess, because with our build, we kind of slaughter everything we fight today. And the super bosses are unfortunately no exception. So the first of the lot is the Eye of Alagath here. Possessing one of her rank-and-file soldiers, it ends up becoming a fearsome opponent indeed, giving her an avatar here with which to fight us. I gotta say, I do like the design, especially the fact that she's wielding a mace. Maces are cool weapons you don't often see used in games. You may also notice the fact that she has these 4 blue symbols surrounding her. They basically act as a shield. As long as they're up, she takes no damage, and you need to break all of them by dealing enough hits to actually start hurting her. Sadly, once her shield is gone, she starts hurting quite a bit. That is the sheer power of the Teachings of the Lifeblade. It will end up doubling, if not outright tripling, the damage that you deal. Our damage is so high we're actually able to ignore her gimmick here. She tries to restore her shields to full and then go on an attack rage, where you basically just have to avoid things much like the fight with Abigail, until you get a chance to get a hit in edgewise. But because we do so much damage, she can never restore it to full, and this pretty much defangs her entirely. Now, we did pretty soundly defeat her, but unfortunately we lost our Laurel Crown in the process. It stood up for a while in that fight, but eventually we took enough blows that it eventually crumbled, so let's try that again. We're near the end of the game, we're already pretty overpowered, we can do a little bit of safe scumming, just to ensure we're as OP as possible going into the finale. Which I think I mentioned would be today, but I'm actually saving it for next time. It went on for longer than I remembered, so I figured it would be fine as its own update, and yeah, apparently plain old fists are much stronger than with the aid of the Soul Collector. I think that's just mainly a result of the regular unarmed moveset having a lot more hits to it than the slightly different one that the Soul Collector grants. Namely, the attacking into jumping move that ends up doing like 3 attacks at once. That's basically tripled our damage output. So that's one super boss definitively taken down. Let's go after the next. Not before a brief platforming segment right there. I don't know why they don't just give you an easier exit out of the room, but it is what it is. So before we quite go after the next super boss, let's make one more final upgrade, because we're not overpowered enough already. I farmed up a large emerald off screen, and with this 4th one from the Strange Child, we're able to bring our monk's robes to level 3, their maximum. There's a Super Saiyan joke in here somewhere. But yes, we now not only have greater passive stat bonuses, but our unarmed damage when in focus mode is even stronger than it previously was. So with our strength even greater than it was a moment before, let's go find the second super boss. It's in an area that we've never actually seen before. And in fact, I'm embarrassed to say I should have done due diligence to show off before when we first could have arrived there. We couldn't have gotten very far in it, but I still should have shown it off. It is the pit. Your progress pretty quickly ends up being balked by these spiked boxes. Yeah, angels, demons, demigods, gods, they have nothing on spike boxes. In terms of level design, this area doesn't really have much going for it. It's pretty much just a straight linear corridor with the occasional check to make sure you have this side void spell. That way you can't just say glitch your way, damage your way through those spiked boxes. Not that you'd really have a reason to. After a certain point you can't get up any further anyway. I guess they just wanted to make sure you couldn't come here any earlier. In terms of enemies, there's nothing new either. Just the same old demons we're used to fighting by now. They come in groups, so as per the usual, we're making use of Kante. Seriously, as far as this LP is concerned, Kante might as well be the 5th playable character, for as much as I've used him and as useful as he is. Kinda wish I could actually play directly as him, cause as far as the Kickstarter backers go, I really do like his design. It has that sort of styling purple pimp look going on, and it actually pulls it off pretty well. Maybe that's just my bad fashion taste though. So this room right here is why you can't make it much further. I don't think you can actually ascend it unless you have the double jump. You might be able to finagle your way up with the ice pillar and wall jump, but don't quote me on that. And even if you could, there's really no reason to, given that the main reason to come here is locked behind a divine door. So we're making sure we have a good spell loadout for the next boss, since as soon as we make it through this time challenge, we're straight into the fight. So, having just fought the Eye of Alagath, we're now going to fight the Eye of Magato. I do like the little detail of these ultra tough super bosses being formed from the weakest enemies in the game. I just think that's neat. And yes, I do call them ultra tough even though we do slaughter our way through them. Trust me, if you're playing this game for the first time and have not yet mastered the combat or character building, they are walls. The character building especially, they have such gargantuan amounts of HP and defense that unless you have a really well thought out character build, it takes a while to wear them down. That's why the time scores are so lenient. You're expected to be fighting them for anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes, if you're doing well. And even for our build, when we're not using the teachings of the Life Blade, they're still pretty tough. So the Eye of Magato here is probably my favorite boss after the Azudor and Distan refight. And that is because, unlike a lot of other bosses, it is a simple duel fight and a rather well designed one. Eye of Magato is all about dashing around the place, doing melee attacks when she gets close to you, and unlike 90% of the other enemies in the game, she's actually an effective blocker. Because she'll not only change her direction to block your attacks so you can't just dash behind her, but she also has the perfect guard ability. I guess the common demon must have picked up an upgraded mana keystone sometime in his adventures. And what that means is that even if you end up breaking her guard with a heavy attack or magic, she'll simply parry it and respond with a counterattack of her own. And that makes her a lot more tricky to deal with than pretty much any other boss in the game. But even with that in mind, she still went down pretty easily. We're just too OP, too godlike for there to be any other possibility. So now we have the eyes of 2 gods, as well as the teachings of the technique that rent them from their faces in the first place. I gotta say, if we want to stop this whole revolution thing and just open up a magic artifact store somewhere, maybe strike a deal with Ernest Borgnine and we'd be pretty good to go. Well, with that out of the way, we're not done just yet. First of all, we need to exit this pit. And we're not doing so by the way we came in, but by a secondary entrance. Of course, there are demons here too. You'd think they just give up at this point, considering we killed the avatar of their god, but they're just a very tenacious bunch, I suppose. Gotta give them credit for that. There's not too much else to say about this area, unfortunately, and yet we still have a few more rooms to go through. This is probably the worst area in the late game in terms of introducing new stuff. You'd think maybe they could introduce some poison variants of already existing enemies, ones we haven't seen before. It would be thematically fitting, well, with all the green in the environment. And again, can any enemy really threaten us, at least once we know the terror of the spike boxes? Seriously, we've taken more damage from these things than we did against either of the super bosses. Like, all Algath and Morgato need to do is just build a castle entirely of these and they'd be fine. But we've exited the pit and now we're back in the Mana Crystal Mine. This is why in the current version of the game you don't need to pick up that treasure chest nor that crew member your first time through, because you can always end up returning here later and pick them up then. In fact, it's probably better for you to do that unless you really want that armor piece or the focus finisher you get, since then you don't have to worry about running out the clock. And now that we have the Divine Key, we can proceed even further in this area. That right there is the last spider we'll ever be fighting. Let us have a moment of silence for poor Kumo-chan. I've been reading a manga recently called Kumo Desuga Nanika, which basically translates to, "So I'm a spider, so what?" It is a trapped in another world reincarnation story which is so common these days in Japanese pop culture. But it's actually pretty entertaining. It's fairly novel in its premise because rather than being reincarnated with all sorts of crazy abilities, the main character is reincarnated as a lowly spider. Now, granted, it's a monster spider in a fantasy world, so she quickly climbs in strength, but mostly through her own efforts. It has pretty great art and is cute as fuck in a lot of instances, so I highly recommend it. Although I do warn that it is still pretty early on and it's a bi-weekly series, so maybe put off checking it out until it's built up a bit of an archive. Anyway, we make it through the mines and make it to the Hall of the Fallen, the final optional area you can do in the home of the third and final super boss. It's also home to a rather unique enemy gimmick. There are 2 enemies you can encounter in this area, and which one spawns is random. The only thing determined in each room is the number of them that spawn. And even when you take them down, they're not down for good. It's the Hall of the Fallen for a reason. Enemies here get continually resurrected unless you specifically absorb their souls. And this job is made trickier by these hands that try and attack you and stun you while you're doing so. This gladiator right here is the other alternate enemy type that can end up spawning. Neither are particularly threatening, but they can be tricky to deal with. The gladiators are just as effective at blocking as the Eye of Morgato was, and they have a powerful shield bash that can knock you away quite a distance. The chain users, on the other hand, are completely impervious to damage from the front and like to dodge away before attacking you from a distance, off screen usually. Even if you have a weaker build, they're probably not going to pose too much of a threat, but their main purpose is not to kill you directly, but to drain your resources so that when you do the actual fights here, you'll have a much tougher time. The first of these actual fights is against a shadow clone of one of your crewmates. I don't remember whether which one you fight is based off of the character that you play as, or if it's simply random. I think it might be random. It can be Wyatt, Reina, Vladin, or Gilda. How much trouble you end up having with them comes down pretty much purely to how effectively you can stunlock them. They can actually be fairly nasty if you leave them free to their own devices for long enough. Fortunately, you are gifted a save room right after. Very useful, especially if you did not come here with a warmth elixir, and thus are taking constant environmental damage. Yeah, this place is frozen, that's why we have that warmth elixir. It also makes refighting this upcoming super boss if you're trying to go for a high ranking all the more convenient. So here is that super boss, Leylodin, the matriarch of the Gorbnu tribe, resurrected here to challenge us. In the first part of the fight, she challenges us one-on-one to an honorable duel. Eventually, she'll summon a lion compatriot to help her, but we kind of stunlock her so completely that we take her directly to the second phase, not even giving her a chance to summon her helper. A good thing, honestly. That lion has a boatload of HP and will continue to run around the arena and harry you whenever it gets near. It can be a rather huge pain to deal with, especially when you're also trying to avoid Leylodin's attacks, whether you're in the first phase or the second phase. The second phase just being a series of attacks you have to avoid from Leylodin while waiting for her to make herself vulnerable for you to damage. If you have enough damage output, you can actually one-cycle this phase. Unfortunately, we had to do it in 3. There are limits even to Reina's power, at least when she's under my command. Now, for S-ranking Leylodin, we get one of the better bonuses in the game. 3 free stat points. Definitely try and have the Laurel Crown active while beating her. For us though, I'm actually kind of glad that it broke because we ended up with perfectly rounded stats. Everything divisible by 5. You can tell that I was excited there. So, for taking down Leylodin, our true reward is the services of the ancestral Gorbnu Smith. Now, normally one of these 3 slots would be filled with the golden weapon for that character, but since I already have all of them unlocked, they are not purchasable. Normally, this is what we'd be saving our Tamahagane for, since you need all 10 that are available in the game in order to purchase the golden weapon. Since we are free from that burden, we're going to be picking up 4 Gorbnu warrior markings instead. These are ancient markings that can increase any warrior's potential. And what that means in game mechanics terms is that it is overleveling. You want to get past level 20? No problem, just spend some Tamahagane and you can do so. Of course, you're limited to 5 extra levels since there's only 10 Tamahagane in the game, and each marking costs 2. This lets us pick up a few more new abilities like Deity here, increasing the damage that Reckoning deals. That will actually come in pretty handy in the final boss fight. As for the rest of them, I spend a while figuring out what I want to pick up. Ultimately, I just end up going with some stuff in the Protector tree. At this point, I picked up all of the useful skills that we can reach. I will say, I do wish I hadn't spent that Tamahagane on upgrading the Monk Staff, nor the Soul Collector. If we still had those 2, we would have picked up 1 more marking and I could have had a perfect 30 agility. Alas, the opportunity is long since lost. So, leaving the Hall of the Fallen, we return to the mines to complete exploring it, picking up the final treasure chest that's available. I'm actually confused for a bit as to why it doesn't say 100% on the map screen, but I think it only tallies that when you leave the area or something. I end up leaving and then coming back and it says 100%, so it worked out in the end. Now, this exit out of the mines ends up leading us back around to the Engineer's Palace. It's still sealed with a divine door though, so you can't come here any earlier than having beaten both the palace and the ziggurat. But with that, we'll leave things off for today. We arrive at the sanctuary and next time we'll finish the game. This time I swear.